Vivian Howard was born in Deep Run, North Carolina, to tobacco and hog farming parents. She learned early how to appreciate the ebb and flow of eating with the seasons. And after college, Vivian moved to New York City. Anybody ever been there? I visited recently to talk about flood prevention. Really enjoyed it. Got to see the 911 memorial, but I was happy to be back home. She found the city's food and restaurant scene far more intriguing. So in 2005, Vivian and her now husband, Ben Knight, decided to return to Vivian's roots to open a farm-to-fork restaurant. I remember bumping into Ben one day at the farmer's market right across the street from the business going, what's farm-to-fork mean? And 8 years later, I know what it means now. So they opened Chef and the Farmer in summer of 2006, serving local, seasonal, and creative cuisine. Vivian and her restaurant have won numerous accolades, including her selection as a 5-time James Beard Foundation Award semifinalist for Best Chef Southeast. She also owns and operates a second restaurant. Someone earlier here today was talking about it, right across the street from the Chef and the Farmer, called the Boiler Room. They're everything but the kitchen sink sauce. Just remember that. Just thank me later. And in 2012, Vivian approached her childhood neighbor turned filmmaker Cynthia Hill about directing a documentary film series about Eastern North Carolina's food traditions. And 5 years later, the two women have produced 5 seasons of A Chef's Life, a PBS series that celebrates family, work, and food. In fact, in its first 2 seasons, A Chef's Life won a Peabody Award and a Daytime Emmy. That's a pretty big deal. And in 2016, Vivian earned a coveted James Beard Award for Outstanding Personality and Host. In October 2016, she released her first ever cookbook. Did y'all see that out front? They called Deep Run Roots. I encourage you to pick one up. It's filled with stories and more than 200 recipes that celebrate the flavors of her Eastern North Carolina home. And recently, Deep Run Roots was selected as the winner of the 2017 Southern Book Prize for the nonfiction cooking category. And later this year, folks, she will open her first restaurant outside of Kinston called Benny's Big Time Pizzeria in Wilmington, North Carolina. And in early next year, she will also open Handy and Hots, which we're really excited about. It's going to be a bakery in Kinston located on the same block as her existing 2 restaurants. Folks, it has been an incredible honor serving and watching this entrepreneur come back home and do what she does best. I would encourage you all to stand on your feet, if you don't mind, and give this lady the round of applause she deserves as Vivian Howard comes to this stage. I appreciate you.
I haven't done anything yet. Y'all should not stand. Until I started making the show, I could barely look people in the eye and talk to them. So because cooking in a professional kitchen is often about keeping your head down and your mouth shut. And I had become really good at that. And now my job is to keep my head up and my mouth constantly running. And for the most part, I do a pretty good job. And I have become very adept at winging it. But I decided today to make notes because I want what I say to resonate and to matter. So I was told to kind of talk about my return home and my experience running our restaurants in rural America. So I left home when I was 14 years old. I grew up on a tobacco farm, and from a really early age, I remember feeling shame around my background. And I watched TV, and I wanted to be able to order Chinese food and have a Chinese person bring it to my door, and I wanted to have it in the origami-looking box, and I wanted to walk somewhere other than to the car, and I wanted to live in a place with a giant mall that had a Gap. I wanted my town, desperately I wanted my town to have an Applebee's or a Chili's. And, you know, Kinston and certainly Deep Run had none of these things. So I went to boarding school in Winston-Salem, and they happen to have the largest mall in the state, so, and lots of Applebee's. So I was content. And as BJ said, I went to NC State and then lived in New York, and eventually my now husband and I, Ben, made the decision to move back to Eastern North Carolina and open this restaurant. But I'll tell you what really happened was that my family said, you know, we want to help you open a restaurant in North Carolina. And so Ben and I said, oh, awesome. I mean, I think Asheville is really just great. And, you know, the Triangle, I think it's growing. And when we moved back, it became very clear that we could open our restaurant anywhere inside this building that had already been purchased in downtown Kinston. So our options were more limited than I thought. But upon our return home, I noticed a lot of things had changed. Our farmer's market, which is right across the street from the restaurant, was selling bananas and pineapples and things that don't grow anywhere near North Carolina. And the people, for the most part, who were vendors at the market were not growing anything that they were selling. The Magic Mile that Mayor Murphy talked about, I think every single storefront was shuttered. And everybody I ran into, people I knew from my childhood or from church, apologized for still being there. They said, oh, you know, as soon as my mama dies, I'm moving to Raleigh. Or, you know, I'm stuck here because I got to take care of the old family home, and you know you can't sell anything in this shithole, and, you know. And that made me feel very sad. It also made me feel like I had failed. And I began apologizing for being back there. I felt like a failure because the most promising opportunity in front of me was back home in a small town. And I did not know small towns to be places that produced excellent things. When you wanted to go to a great restaurant, you went to a big town. When you wanted to go watch competitive sports, like good sports, you went to a big town. When you wanted to see nice art, you went to a big town. When you wanted to go shopping, you went to a big town. Nothing excellent came out of small towns. So I felt as if my move back to Eastern North Carolina, to the place I grew up, meant that I was destined to not do anything great. And if you watch my show, you can see that I'm very hard on myself. And I could not live with that. So I made a pact with myself that I would not allow my location to determine the quality nor the reach of my work. And I didn't really even know what that meant, but I knew that I could not live with the promise of not doing something great. So at first, I thought it meant that I would cook versions of the food that I cooked in New York or the food that I ate in New York, all the while educating Eastern North Carolinians on how to eat and what to eat and how cultured people dined. That's what I thought, my 27-year-old self. I was going to educate my population. Because I had taken a stint in New York, and now I was better than everybody else, of course. And then, so I did this for about a year, and we've now been open 11 years. And then, over a period of time, two things happened that really reshaped both my approach to cooking as well as the way I saw my community. And again, I apologize if you watched the show closely or if you've read my book, you would have heard two of these stories, but sorry, I've only got so many stories. So we had been open about 2 years, and my dad, who loves to help, you know. He called me one day and he said, Vivian, I've got a man who has, he's got 500 pounds of blueberries for sale, and he really needs to get rid of them, and he'll sell them to you for $1 a pound. And I said, that's great. I'll take about 50 pounds. And he's like, nope, you can only get the $1 a pound price if you get the 500 pounds. And you just don't tell my dad no. So I said, okay. So Dad had someone bring the blueberries to the restaurant on Saturday afternoon. It's the absolute worst time to get something like this because we're scurrying around getting ready for service, and then we're closed Sunday and Monday. So there's not a lot of initiative to really deal with those blueberries. So the blueberries set out over the weekend, and I woke up Monday morning really kind of distraught at what I might do with these blueberries. I knew that they had been suffering not in our walk-in refrigerator. So to make a long story short, I decided that I would make blueberry vinegar. And then what do you do with 20 gallons of blueberry vinegar? And this is where my culture and my community comes in. I started thinking about my most poignant food memory of my childhood, which was on Saturday mornings. My dad had this relationship with this man in our community. His name was Tom Heath, and I think Tom owed my dad some money. And instead of paying him actual money, he brought us barbecued chickens every Saturday morning for years. And Mr. Heath had cooked these barbecued chickens, and if you're from Eastern North Carolina, you know what I'm talking about. He had cooked them on his pig cooker and dressed them with the same barbecue sauce that you would use to make a barbecued pig, so a vinegar-based barbecue sauce. And so my bedroom that I shared with my sister was adjacent to the kitchen. And I would wake up on Saturday morning to the smell of vinegar and smoke and barbecued chicken, and it drew me out of the bed every Saturday morning. And that is, to this day, my most poignant food memory. And so I started thinking about that, and I thought, okay, what if I made blueberry vinegar sauce and made blueberry barbecue chicken? So I did that, and I thought, this can't go with my normal crap, like, risotto. I've got to have this chicken be paired with something that speaks to our place. And so I thought, okay, I'll make slaw. I was really, feeling myself at this point. I thought I'll make slaw, like cabbage slaw, and instead of putting so much sugar in it, I'll put peaches in it. So I made a peach and cabbage slaw and this blueberry barbecue chicken, and I put it on the menu that night alongside like ridiculous stuff like ravioli, like goat cheese ravioli with tomato petals, and foie gras torchon, and just not what I serve now. And we all evolve professionally. So I put this on the menu, and we had maybe 6 entrees at the time, and 95% of the people in the restaurant ordered this blueberry barbecue chicken over all the other amazing sounding choices. And I knew at that moment that I had something. I knew that I had connected to something that I understood and that my diners understood. And don't assume that everyone in my dining room was from Kinston or Eastern North Carolina, because we've always survived from people traveling to our restaurant. So a lot of these people were coming from elsewhere who don't know about our vinegar-based barbecue chicken. They could just sense that this was an extension of my authentic self and my experience, and I was cooking in the voice that was natural to me. So I decided that I was going to overhaul the menu, and I was going to pay attention to the food around me. And I started going to barbecue restaurants, and I went to church with my mom, and really looked at the table for homecoming and made notes about what people made. And I got all the spiral-bound church cookbooks that I could find. I went to buffets, which I would normally, I still can't even talk about it without like kind of turning my nose up. But I went to buffets and made notes about the types of food my people had been cooking for years. And through that, I realized that what we had in Eastern North Carolina was a very unique, very specific, and very particular to our place food culture. And I don't mean like we're cooking Southern food. I mean, we had something that no one else in the South or in the greater United States had. And that made me incredibly excited because I had never believed that before. I worked in a Southern restaurant in New York, but the food that we cooked was the food of the port cities like New Orleans and Savannah and Charleston, and I didn't recognize any of that food, which gave me further shame. So then the second thing that happened was, and this was about a year after I decided to pay attention to Eastern North Carolina food. And so a year later, obviously I had learned all there was to know and was an expert on the subject at 28. And so I got up one morning and I went to let my dog out, and on my doorstep was this Ziploc bag that had these large dark green leaves, and they were floating in this milky kind of liquid, and my dog like backed up, she wanted nothing to do with it, and I picked it up and opened up the bag, and it smelled awful. And so I did what I do every time Eastern North Carolina asks me a question and I can't answer it, and I called my dad. And I said, "Dad, there's this stuff on my doorstep, and I think someone's trying to poison me and Ben." And he asked me to describe it to him, and he's like, "That is not a prank, Vivian. That is a gift. That is collard kraut." And I thought, collard kraut? I mean, my mind was blowing, okay? Because, as I said, I thought I knew everything there was to know on the subject. And I had gone to bed the night before with this book called The Art of Fermentation by Sandor Katz next to my bed, because fermentation at the time was the trendiest technique in all the best kitchens in the country. And so I'm reading this book, trying to be trendy, and the geezers who live down the road from me, the Mills brothers, are making collard kraut, and I had no idea. So I called Mr. Mills, the gentleman who dropped off the kraut, and I said, "Mr. Mills, I really would love to make kraut with y'all." And he said, "All right, we'll invite you next year." I'm like, "Next year? I need to do this now." And he's like, "No, honey, we do it once a year. We got to do it when the Farmer's Almanac says that the moon and the stars are not in the sign of the boughs. And, you can come and watch us make kraut, but you can't touch it because the females, they taint the kraut." And, don't bring your own collards because we only use this very specific strain of collard that we've been saving our seeds for 100 years. And only our water coming from our well will make this kraut right. So I waited a year, and I went and I made the kraut with them, and it lit me on fire. I saw in the Mills brothers a set of wisdom that I did not see in the cities I had lived in. And up until this point, I really only valued the wisdom and the skill set of urban people. I still believed my father, who's an incredibly successful businessman, and my mother, who was a wonderful teacher, and the Mills, and everyone around me, I believed that they were somehow less because they did not live in an urban environment. And I'm just being completely honest here. And part of this is about growing up. I was 28 years old, and so this experience opened my eyes to the fact that there was a lot of wisdom and a lot of skill around me, and my parents might actually be two of the smartest, most resourceful people I know, even though they said things like over yonder, and I want a swallow of that. People don't say that everywhere, okay? Just so you know. And so those two things, an honest look at the food of my place and an honest look at the people of my place, changed everything about my professional and, in many ways, personal life. And I decided that I would do everything I could to honor, exalt, and celebrate the food traditions and the culture around me. And I wanted to do this because, for one, it was working in my business. And for two, I wanted to give the people that were apologizing for being in Eastern North Carolina a reason to feel pride in their place and therefore pride in themselves. So, hold on. This is what happens when you make notes. You try to stay on track. But I did want to be careful not to rely on a sense of nostalgia. A nostalgia that suggested that everything that happened before was somehow better than what was happening now. I wanted to respect our history and with an eye on it for the people who came before me and for what I could learn from it. And I think that's really important for all of us in communities that seem to have less than they once did, because what we have is what we have now. And nostalgia, there's really no place for nostalgia in progress. This is what you do when you have a platform. So one of the things that I was asked to speak about was what do I see as some of the challenges and the opportunities presented by living and working in a rural community. And I really think that the challenges and the benefits are pretty much equal. I think there's challenges to running businesses in cities. I think there's, a lot of the costs are higher. There's more clutter. It's harder to be heard in those cities. The traffic is worse. I can tell you one thing, that my standard of living in Eastern North Carolina is way, way higher than it would be if I were in the Triangle, if I were in Asheville, and certainly if I were in New York. Every time I go back to New York, I thank my lucky stars that I'm not walking down into the subway carrying my 2 children and shopping bags, only to walk back up through the subway and into my apartment. I'm so happy for my minivan. So I really think the challenges and the benefits are pretty equal. And I think running a business anywhere is a challenge. So I don't want to discount what people in urban areas go through to do that. I think that labor is a challenge everywhere. So I've been known to complain about our labor situation at Chef and the Farmer on television, but I know what a lot of my peers in the restaurant business are going through right now in the Triangle or in New York, in that we have a restaurant bubble. There's tons of restaurants and there's not enough people to work in them. And so that's an example where it's a challenge in the Triangle, but for me, everyone who wants to work in a chef-driven, technique-driven kitchen who lives in Eastern North Carolina comes to me. So that I see as a tremendous benefit. When we talk about the real challenges of living and working in Eastern North Carolina, the only challenge I see that we have that people in urban environments do not, is the lack of high-speed broadband internet. I am so pissed off that this is not a greater topic of discussion, because we hear all this talk about infrastructure this and infrastructure that. And I think when people hear that word infrastructure, they think of bridges and tunnels and roads and stuff we have. But the infrastructure of the 21st century is broadband internet, and we do not have it where I live. And if we do not get it, we're going to be left even further behind. I feel like it is a right, a right as a tax-paying citizen to have access to this. But Susan Myers, who lives in my community, I think they've started their own internet company trying to get internet to the people in our community. I mean, they've got some kind of transmitter on top of my dad's grain bin. I don't even know what's going on. But we should not have to do that. We have children in our community who get iPads at school and then go home and can't do anything with them. Why doesn't anybody talk about this? Anyway, that's really the only... So that's something that we need to address, or needs to be addressed, because the tension between urban and rural is powerful right now, and our voices are articulated by other groups. And I know that to be the case because if we were able to have our voices be heard, then we would be hearing about this, and we're not. So anyway, the next few things I'm going to talk about are not what I see as challenges presented by being in a rural setting, but they're things that I have noticed about working in a small town that make things challenging. And I think these are ways that I think we as rural people get in our own way. And you can agree or disagree with me. I'm sure there'll be some of both, but again, this is what happens when you have a platform. I think our communities don't expect enough out of themselves. Too often when we open businesses in our towns, we don't shoot for excellent. We shoot for good enough for Kinston. And in order for our businesses to survive and for our businesses to be places that draw in new population, they have to be excellent. In order for our citizens that already live in our town to choose to shop in our city or to dine in our city, instead of driving an hour and a half to Raleigh, our restaurants have to be as good as the restaurants in Raleigh. There was no worse insult to me in the first few years of our restaurant than, this place is really good for Kinston. If I had the confidence that I have now and someone said that to me, I would probably hit them. So keep that in mind. And that doesn't mean it has to be big and elaborate and expensive. It just means it has to be excellent. You know, I see often in rural communities, people try to do too much. And I use the restaurant paradigm because it's the only one I really know. But we'll open a restaurant that is 6,000 square feet in a town that has 20,000 people. And we will have the cheapest tables and no tablecloths and mismatched cups, and our menu will be 40 items long. When what we should be doing is opening a 1,000 square foot shop where we make the thing that we make best. And we are making it. We don't hire someone to make it, we make it. The only reason Chef and the Farmer made it is because both Ben and I worked in our business every single day for 5 years. Both Ben and I. If both of us had not been there and had our eyes on excellence, then it would not have worked. So I feel like we are shortchanging our population. When you open something in your town and you say, it'll be good enough for here, what does that say about what you think about the people who live around you? We're not valuing each other. Let's do something excellent because we are capable. Do not let your location determine the quality and the reach of your work. So another challenge that I see in our small towns is that for some reason, people are threatened by others' success. And not all people. But as soon as they see someone doing well, their instinct is to tear them down. Our fear, I think, is that the pie is not big enough for all of us to have a piece. If you get your slice, it doesn't mean my slice is smaller. It means that there's hope that my pie might get bigger. And competition is not bad. Competition makes things better. So, as I mentioned before, I think my parents are two of the smartest, most resourceful, hardworking people I know. But in a lot of ways, they have this mentality. You know, we had been open 5 or 6 years, and someone was going to open a restaurant around the corner. And my mom and dad, they were just incensed about it. Like, you know, I just don't know if y'all are going to make it. I mean, Billy Bob's opening around the corner, and I just don't think you're good enough to, compete. And aren't you worried? And then it became, they rode by that restaurant every night, and there were no cars in the parking lot, and that did them so much good. But for me, that's a disaster. I want people to open restaurants and shops in Kinston and have them be excellent so that we're not the only thing working. So that it doesn't look like some kind of mystical fairy came in here and did this, and she's the only one who can. I want Kinston to grow beyond me. So competition is good. In fact, if something excellent opened around the corner, I might work a little harder. We might get smarter. So... I think we should encourage competition. Another question I was asked to address was, what can other communities do to foster and welcome new leaders? This is probably going to be controversial, and I don't know. I'm not an economist, and I don't work in local government, so what I'm about to say may be completely out of whack, but as I said, when you have a platform, this is what you do with it. And if you can't tell, this subject really matters to me. So that's why I made notes. I wanted to make sure that I said what I felt, because these are conversations that I've had with my husband over the past 11 years. And for whatever reason, no one else is asked to hear it. So what can other communities do to foster and welcome new leaders? I see this happening in our community and in similar communities where we are trying to get large corporations to move to our town and bring lots and lots of jobs. Will the BMW plant open here? Will the Boeing plant open here? And I think those things are great. But we have had more traction in our community with small businesses. Small business owners are invested in the community probably more than anyone else. And small businesses have the opportunity to be multi-generational. So it's possible to get people for many generations if that small business is successful and if you support it and it's excellent. And one way I think we can do this is to give tax incentives to young people who want to open small businesses in our town. I know we do it for big businesses, I'm not going to name the business, but a big company came to Kinston, and there were millions of dollars given in tax write-offs or incentives for them to come. And I think they have, roughly 200 employees. Well, we have 100. So, I don't work in local government, and I don't fully understand these issues, but this is what I see from my perspective. Also, Ben and I would not be in Kinston had my parents not given us the opportunity to open this restaurant here. And that's why we're here, and the reason that we're staying is because we have roots in the community. So when you're working to attract people to come to your town, it behooves you to work to attract people who have roots in your region, because they are the ones who will stay. I can say this from experience, because at this point, people want to work at Chef and the Farmer. So they'll move from New Orleans to come work at Chef and the Farmer, or they'll move from Tennessee to come work at Chef and the Farmer. But I know from experience that none of them are staying longer than 2 years. But if someone has family in Greenville, and they have been working in Asheville, and they want to have kids, Chef and the Farmer looks really nice, because that grandma and granddaddy in Greenville, they look like great babysitters, and they're free. And then once you get there and you realize that your parents are people who exist beyond just birthing you, and you kind of enjoy their company because you have this shared history and you can laugh about things other people can't laugh about together, and then you're like, it's not so bad being here, I think I'll stay. So I feel as if in our communities, if we can strive to attract people who already have a connection to that place, then we'll be more successful in keeping them. And really, that's what we want. None of our communities, I tell people all the time, I'm not trying to build Raleigh. I'm trying to make my town a place with enough opportunity and with enough opportunity that my children would consider moving back here. So this is probably going to get more controversial now. I actually jotted this down in the doorway over there. So it wasn't, fully, I didn't check myself. But something I noticed in our community when we go to meetings with community leadership is that all the leadership and all the people there are old. And what we talk about in these meetings is how to get young people to the town and involved. Well, how about if you invite them? And when you invite them, then you listen to them. I guarantee if you go to a Chamber of Commerce meeting in Raleigh, there will be a lot of 20-somethings and 30-somethings in the room, and their voices will be heard. And I feel like we need to take note of that, because we're trying to attract young people, and we need to listen to what it is they want out of community, because they'll be the people to take our community forward. So try to attract or invite and listen to people in their 20s and 30s. Now, I know I would not have wanted to listen to myself when I was 27 or 28, because I already told y'all what I was like. But it doesn't really matter, because I'm a part of the community. Okay. The other thing that we focus on a lot when we're in these leadership meetings is what our community's lost. the things we used to have. We used to have textiles and tobacco and excited people, and you could drink and drive, and you could smoke in the grocery store. You know, all that wonderful stuff that used to go on. And, you know, we very rarely focus on what we actually have, and what we can, I'm not going to say profit, but what we can exploit, for lack of a better word. I mean, I have exploited my mom's chicken and rice to the point that it's ridiculous, and there's 3 ingredients in it. But it was something that I realized that I had, and that it touched people, and it was unique, and it represented my family and my place and honored my mother. And it's not, you know, Mayor Murphy said, our Neuse River in Kinston is not as nice as New Bern's, but hell, we've got a river. You know, and I'd like, you know, there's so much that I think we can do with it, but we're focused on it not being as pristine as New Bern's. But, you know, I'd love to see a little kayak. You could go on a kayak trip on the river for a few hours. We have, you know, so many tourists coming to town, and every time I see them, I'm like, what are you doing? What are you going to do all day? I almost feel inclined to invite them to my house or something. But, you know, I feel like we need to look at what we have and not compare it to what anybody else has. Isn't that what we've been taught to do in our personal lives by our parents and the Bible and all of that, you know? Don't compare what you have with what someone else has. It'll never help you. I've spent my whole life trying to be a size 2. And I have just now realized that I'm not going to be. You know, one of the things I think our community has, you know, I mentioned earlier, you know, small towns don't produce excellent stuff. That's what I believed. And I mentioned, you know, if you want to go see an exciting sports game, you got to go to a big city. Well, Kinston has one of, if not the most exciting high school basketball program in the state, maybe in the South. And why we don't, I've got to come up with a better word than exploit, but why we don't exalt that, capitalize. I don't know if that sounds better, but I'll take it. Why we don't build something out around that and celebrate that community and make Kinston, you know, a basketball mecca. I don't know, because it's something we already have. And I can't understand whether it's the quality of the players or the quality of the coaches or both, but it's an interesting phenomenon because it's not a one-off. It's happened for years and years and years and years. And that is something that is very cool about Kinston. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Any questions from anybody? Come on, somebody has to want to ask her a question.
I'm going to capitalize. How can I get you to speak at the Columbus Chamber of Commerce annual banquet? I wrote that on my business card. I was going to hand it to you, but I'll ask in front of everyone.
You see that mean-looking lady behind you with that black jacket on? She's my...
I was going to say, I'll cook for you. I'm originally from New York, but don't tell anyone.
Lily? Okay.
Hi, thank you. So thinking about, you mentioned making your town with having enough opportunity for your children to come back and for to stay and for other people to be involved. And I was just thinking, I think Lenoir County, and correct me if I'm wrong, is 40% African American. And so I was thinking about some of the businesses in Kinston and how many are led by people of color versus white people. And I was thinking about what kind of opportunities you might be engaging in to make sure that everyone from Lenoir County is represented and has a chance to participate in the economy in Lenoir County, whether that's maybe purchasing from under-resourced farmers or farmers of color or things like that. Wanted to offer that.
How to provide opportunity for all people is, that's a challenge. I get credited with revitalizing Kinston all the time when we have only put lipstick on a pig in a lot of ways, because not everyone in our community has opportunity, and I don't have a solution for that. But the basketball capitalization that I was just talking about, I feel like that is a way to produce pride in the community. And when you have pride in yourself and pride in what you do, then it shapes the way you interact in your community. And again, I think that speaks to some of what I said about the leadership meetings and who do we invite to these, and who do we listen to in these meetings, and what kind of questions are we asking, and so I would adjust what I said to say we shouldn't just invite young people, but we should invite young people of color and listen to them, so that we can shape healthier communities.
Let's take 2 more questions right here.
Hi, I'm Thomas. You mentioned having 100 or so employees and about creating a business that has roots in the community. And I wonder if you had ever considered sharing ownership with your employees so that you can have a multi-generational institution that may survive after you've moved on.
Well, not exactly, but the bakery that Mayor Murphy mentioned, Handy and Hot, that we're opening, is an effort to share ownership. So I have a young woman who's worked with me for about 8 years in the kitchen, and she's plateaued at Chef and the Farmer. She doesn't want to be the chef de cuisine there, but I would like to keep her, and I would like to keep her in our community. So she always wanted to work in pastry and baking, but I always needed her on the savory side. So we decided that we would open this bakery, and she will be a partner. And so that is our way of giving her ownership, keeping her in the community, and showing our other employees that that sort of thing is possible.
Last question to Lily.
So I'm a huge fan of yours, and I'm a huge fan of the Rural Center. So one piece of advice and then one comment.
Oh, God.
I think your best word is not capitalize, but leverage.
Leverage.
So that should
Okay,
be the
I like
word.
that. That is better.
And then
you.
the second thing I would say is, I forgot. What was the second thing I was going to say? I'm sure it was brilliant, but
I think it was a compliment.
I truly have. No, it was. No, I seriously can't remember. You're great.
Thank you.
I know. The other thing to say, that for you to say that broadband is your biggest frustration in your community speaks 100% to what this group has been committed to doing for 30 years. So spot on.
Thank you.
So, Vivian, we can't pass up this opportunity on that note to introduce you to the director of the Office of Broadband for the state of North Carolina, Those of us at the Rural Center are a huge fan of this guy who's doing some incredibly hard work and really doing a great job of helping us figure out how we keep you and a lot of other people from being pissed off.
Hey, I can't even watch Netflix.
No, we all feel your frustration. So we are trying to make inroads there. And I actually came up to ask you a food question, but I'll promise to work on your broadband issue in Kinston if you help me with what I'm pissed off about.
Okay.
And it's the food in our public schools. So my son will go. Thank you.
It's really interesting that you asked that question. Were you done with it?
No, well, I was going to tell you, we're proud to send our sons to public schools. But when he buys his lunch at the public school, I ask him what he got, and he has Doritos and chocolate milk. No offense to the folks who make Doritos, but we're supposed to be an agriculture state. We have food here. We see, pamphlets in the back that show, that promote locally grown. And so, one of the things I can't figure out is why don't we have plant-based whole foods served to our kids in public schools, considering all the health issues that result from a bad diet.
I just spent 2 days in Durham at this very intensive seminar with a group of chefs around this subject that was sponsored by Blue Cross Blue Shield and the James Beard Foundation. And we were trying to wrap our heads around why our school lunches are so bad, unappealing. I would say they are nutritionally balanced. If they were to get the lunch that's offered, it sounds as if your son is getting a la carte, which I'm not blaming him, but so the answer in a nutshell is budget. They do not, there's not enough money allotted to the school lunches to make them appealing as well as nutritionally balanced. But there is a bill that will be in front of the House that will offer $200 million more to that budget. I was told that the bill doesn't stand a chance, but our plan of action is this spring to have a statewide awareness campaign around why school lunch is so important and why it's important for it to be both appealing and nutritious. And it's going to be led by chefs. And we're going to talk at our tables, and we're going to run a week worth of specials that represent for us what an appealing ideal school lunch would be, because I believe the only way we will change this and offer delicious, nutritious school lunches is if everybody cares about it, because this is what's happening. Your sons go to public school and they buy a la carte, and you seem like a good guy, part of you. No, I'm just kidding. and so you're concerned about this, but a lot of the people making decisions and deciding whether or not this matters, their kids go to private school or they pack their kids' lunch. So they don't see this as an issue that pertains to them. But what we have to realize is that an investment in our children's health is an investment in our future and in our pocketbooks, whether you pack your kids' lunch or not. So this awareness campaign that is really our first step in trying to convince the greater population that school lunch matters to everyone. Thank you all.